For months, I thought my husband was dying. But one moment changed everything, and I realized the truth was never about his illness. Welcome to Shishi Fairy Tales. Let me take you back to the beginning. People always said my husband is strong. Richard Coleman is a billionaire, but not the loud kind. He wears simple suits, drives himself, and speaks calmly. Money follows him quietly, like it knows where to go. Our home reflects that same quiet order. Nothing flashy. Nothing careless. Just comfort, routine, and control. That is why no one questions him when he says he is sick. It begins with small changes. Richard stops jogging in the mornings. He cancels business trips. He sleeps longer during the day and stays awake at night, sitting in the living room with the lights low. I assume stress is finally catching up to him. One evening, I find him resting on the couch, eyes closed. "Did you take your medication?" I ask. He nods. Yes. I believe him. Doctors start coming more often. They speak in careful voices, using words I don't fully understand. Richard always thanks them and sends them away before I can ask questions. I tell myself he wants privacy. When he finally gathers the family, I feel nervous. He stands in front of us, hands folded. Our children watch him closely. His brothers sit stiffly. His sister covers her mouth. "I'm not well," Richard says. The doctors are monitoring it. I need to slow down. No diagnosis. No details. Just that. Tears follow. Promises follow. Concern fills the room. Life shifts quickly. Some relatives visit daily. Others call once, then disappear. Business partners suddenly have excuses. Dinners grow quiet. Laughter fades. I stay close. I cook. I help him up the stairs. I listen to his breathing at night, but there are moments I don't think much of. Richard never complains of pain, he never asks for help, and sometimes, when he thinks no one is watching, he looks around the room carefully, as if he is paying attention to things I cannot see. One night, I ask softly, "Are you scared?" He looks at me and smiles faintly. "No," he says. "I'm learning." I don't understand what he means. I kiss his hand and tell him to rest. At the time, his words mean nothing. I believe sickness has entered our home. I don't know something else has arrived with it. Our children are grown adults, with lives of their own. Daniel is 28, confident and busy. Michael is 25, sharp and impatient. Our daughter, Emily, is 23, gentle and observant. They do not live at home, but Richard's illness pulls them back into our space, at least at first. Daniel arrives the morning after the announcement. He hugs his father quickly, checks his phone, and promises to return later. Michael calls instead of visiting. He asks practical questions about doctors, insurance, and work schedules. Emily comes quietly that evening, sits beside Richard, and listens more than she speaks. I notice the difference, but I do not judge it. Richard's days become slower. He eats less. He rests more. His voice stays calm, but his eyes look tired. At night, I wake to find him sitting in the dark, hands folded, staring ahead. When I ask what he needs, he tells me nothing. Extended family reacts in strange ways. Some show sudden concern. Others grow distant. Richard's brothers argue softly about responsibilities. His sister asks if decisions have already been made. Everyone seems nervous, like the ground beneath us has shifted. Money changes the tone of every conversation. Business partners stop visiting. Messages grow shorter. Meetings are postponed. I hear words like risk and timing whispered on the phone. Richard listens, says little, and ends calls politely. Daniel visits less. Michael complains about stress. Emily keeps coming. She brings soup. She washes dishes without being asked. She sits with her father, reading quietly or watching old movies. Sometimes I catch her studying his face, like she is trying to memorize it. One afternoon, Daniel suggests hiring full-time help. Michael agrees quickly. They speak as if Richard is no longer in the room. Richard says nothing. That night, I confront him gently. "You should tell them how you feel." He smiles at me, tired but peaceful. They're busy, he says. Life moves fast. I nod, though something twists in my chest. I begin to sense an imbalance. Not anger. Not cruelty. Just distance. Comfort pulling people away. Only Emily stays close, steady and quiet. At the time, I believe this is how families respond to illness. I still do not imagine there is anything else behind it, yet I wait. Illness changes people in ways that are not loud. Richard can no longer stand for long periods. Some mornings, he needs help just to sit upright. His hands shake when he holds a cup. I steady him without thinking, but my body is growing tired in ways I don't admit out loud. The house is quieter now, yet somehow more crowded. Daniel comes less often, but when he does, he goes straight to the study. He speaks in low tones on the phone. Michael brings documents I don't understand and asks Richard to sign when he feels strong enough. Richard listens, nods, and says little. Emily still sits beside her father. She adjusts his pillows. She notices when he hasn't eaten. She never asks about money. I notice something else. Richard's brothers begin showing up without calling first. They walk through rooms like they already belong to them. One afternoon, I overhear a conversation about a warehouse in New Jersey. Another time, a cousin asks if one of the California properties is still active. When I ask Richard about it, he closes his eyes. Let them talk, he says softly. But they sound serious, I reply. They always do, he says. Don't worry. I try not to, but I am exhausted. Caring for someone is different when the illness does not move forward or backward. There is no clear direction. Some days Richard cannot stand alone. Other days he insists on walking the hallway slowly, gripping the wall for balance. At night, I sleep lightly. During the day, I catch myself wishing for quiet. I hate that thought the moment it appears. Doctors still come. They still leave with careful expressions. No one gives timelines. No one gives certainty. One afternoon, Richard's lawyer, Mr. Harris, visits. He is polite, calm. He asks Richard a few questions, then leaves without discussing anything in front of us. Later that evening, Daniel argues with Michael in the kitchen. You can't just move things without approval, Daniel says. Michael lowers his voice. Someone has to keep things running. I pretend not to hear. I tell myself families act strange during illness, but Richard grows quieter. His eyes linger on people longer than before. When he thinks no one is watching, his face tightens, like something inside him has cracked. One night, as I help him into bed, he grips my wrist gently. Are you tired of this? He asks. I hesitate. I'm just tired, I say. He nods slowly, like he expected that answer. That night, I turn away and fall asleep quickly. I do not see his tears, and I do not yet understand how much he is losing while still alive. Power does not disappear when a man becomes ill. It only attracts people who believe it is unattended. Michael has always been ambitious. Even before Richard fell sick, he spoke often about efficiency, growth, and modern leadership. He worked in finance, did well for himself, and enjoyed reminding people that he understood the market better than most. Now, his confidence changes tone. He no longer asks his father for updates. He gives them. One afternoon, I hear him speaking firmly in the study. Dad can't handle daily operations anymore, Michael says into the phone. We need continuity. Investors hate uncertainty. When I step inside, he pauses and smiles at me. Just managing expectations. He says. Richard sits nearby, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. He does not interrupt. Later, Michael brings documents to the living room. These are temporary, he explains. Just so things don't fall apart. Richard glances at the papers but does not reach for them. I'll review them later, he says. Michael exhales sharply. Later might be too late. Daniel's approach is different. He does not speak about companies. He speaks about property. He drives out to Richard's estates without telling anyone. He walks through buildings with agents, asking questions about value and maintenance. Once, he calls me from one of the properties. Mom, this place is bleeding money. He says casually. It might be smart to let it go. Your father hasn't mentioned selling anything, I reply. Well, he's sick. Daniel says. Someone has to think clearly. That word, sick, is becoming permission. Permission to decide, permission to override, permission to replace. Richard grows weaker. Standing requires effort. Walking requires assistance. His voice softens, but his eyes sharpen. Emily notices everything. Dad, do you want Michael making those calls? She asks quietly one evening. Richard says nothing at first. No, he answers eventually. But I'm listening. I am not listening as closely. I am tired. I miss sleeping through the night. I miss conversations that aren't about health or responsibility. Some days, I let decisions pass without question because arguing feels heavier than silence. Michael begins introducing himself differently. I'm stepping in for now, he tells people. Just until Dad recovers. No one corrects him. Richard hears it all. One night, as I help him into bed, he whispers, barely audible, "They're standing in my shadow." I assume he means fear. I do not yet realize he means replacement, and I do not see how much that knowledge is breaking his heart. Illness has a way of changing who speaks first. Before, Richard led every conversation. Now, people speak around him, over him, and sometimes past him, as if his silence gives them permission. Michael begins coming with authority instead of concern. He arrives early, leaves late, and carries himself like someone already seated at the head of a table. One afternoon, I hear him speaking to staff in the hallway. "From now on, reports go through me," he says. "Dad needs rest." When I mention it to Richard, he closes his eyes. "I heard," he says. "You should say something," I urge. He shakes his head slightly. "Let him speak." That answer confuses me. Daniel's movements become harder to track. He travels more. He sends photos of properties with notes attached. Needs renovation. High upkeep. Possible buyer interest. One evening, I overhear him arguing with someone on the phone. "We can't wait for approval forever," he snaps. He's not in a position to decide. I step into the room. Daniel stiffens, then forces a smile. "Just logistics," he says. I begin to feel like a guest in my own home. Emily remains close to her father. She reads to him. She brings him water without being asked. She does not talk about money. She does not suggest solutions. One night, she asks me quietly, "Mom, why does everyone sound like Dad is already gone?" I have no answer. Richard's lawyer, Mr. Harris, visits more frequently now. He never stays long. He never speaks loudly. But after each visit, Richard seems steadier, as if someone has reminded him of who he is. One evening, I catch a glimpse of a document on the table. It lists company names, ownership structures, and clauses I do not understand. Richard notices my stare and gently slides it away. "Nothing for you to worry about," he says. I am not sure if that is reassurance or distance. My patience wears thin. My body aches. Caring for Richard feels endless, and I hate myself for the relief I feel when Michael or Daniel steps in. I begin trusting them with decisions I once would have questioned. Richard notices. He watches me carefully now, the way he watches everyone. One night, as I turn off the lights, he says softly, "People show you who they are when they think you can no longer stop them." I sigh. "You're tired. Don't think like that." He looks at me for a long moment. "I'm not tired," he says. "I'm awake." That night, I lie beside him, facing away. I do not see his tears, and I do not yet realize that the house is no longer waiting for him to heal, it is waiting for him to step aside. I am not a woman without her own life. Before Richard fell sick, I had built something for myself. I ran an executive wellness consulting firm based in New York, advising corporate leaders on performance and recovery. My company did well. Very well. I employed people. I traveled when I wanted. I earned my own money. Still, everything felt smaller once Richard became ill. My days became routines of care. My nights became quiet. I stopped attending events. I stopped being seen. People no longer asked about my work. They asked about my husband. At first, I didn't mind. Then I began to miss myself. Michael and Daniel took more control at home. Decisions moved quickly without discussion. Richard grew weaker. Some days, He could not rise from the chair without help. I found myself making choices simply because someone had to. One afternoon, my financial advisor suggested something. "You should protect your interests," he said carefully. "Just in case." I knew what he meant: a property. Something in my name. Something secure. I didn't tell Richard. I told myself it wasn't betrayal. It was preparation. That evening, I attended a business mixer downtown. It felt good to dress up again. To speak without whispering. To be asked about my success instead of my husband's condition. A younger man stood beside me at the bar. Confident. Attentive. He listened when I spoke. "You don't look like someone who should be hiding at home," he said. I smiled. I didn't correct him. We talked. Nothing improper. Nothing dramatic. Just attention. Just warmth. When I returned home, Richard was asleep. I watched him for a long time. His chest rose and fell slowly. His face looked older. Fragile. I felt guilt. Then frustration. Then something worse. Distance. Over the next weeks, I spent more time away. Longer meetings. Later nights. I told myself I deserved balance. That I had already given enough. Richard noticed. "You're gone often," he said quietly one night. "I'm working," I replied. He nodded. "Of course." But his eyes lingered on me longer than before. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. I did not know whether I was losing my husband, or losing my patience with waiting for a man everyone else had already replaced, and I did not yet realize that Richard saw it all, every step, every silence, every shift away from him. By the time winter arrived, the house no longer felt like a home. Michael spoke openly about restructuring the company. Daniel moved freely through properties as if they already belonged to him. Papers changed hands without Richard's approval. Meetings happened behind closed doors, and I changed too. I stopped pretending I didn't see it. I quietly reserved a waterfront apartment under my name. I told myself it was security. Independence. A woman protecting herself. My business was thriving, an executive wellness consulting firm with high-profile clients across the East Coast, but it no longer felt like enough. I wanted certainty. I wanted freedom. I wanted more. Richard's illness felt endless. Some nights, I barely checked on him. I trusted the children. I trusted time. Emily never left his side. One afternoon, Richard's phone rang while Emily sat beside him, adjusting his pillow. The screen showed a name Richard hadn't mentioned in years. "George." Emily hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end changed immediately when she explained everything: how long her father had been sick, how no diagnosis had worked, how he was getting weaker. She cried while speaking. Richard watched her, tears gathering in his eyes. George paused, then spoke firmly. "My son is a medical doctor. 11 years of practice. He works in Toronto now. Bring Richard here. I'll handle everything. You won't pay a thing. This is what friends do." Emily looked at her father. Richard nodded slowly. I did not argue. 2 days later, Emily traveled with her father to Canada, then went to a private clinic in Toronto recommended by George's son. I stayed behind. For the first time in months, the house felt lighter. The silence didn't feel painful, it felt relieving. And that should have scared me. George's home was quiet. Not the heavy silence of fear, but the calm, controlled quiet of a place where everything had purpose. Clean floors. Neutral colors. Soft lighting. Nothing hurried. Nothing out of place. Richard was examined carefully. Blood samples were taken first. Then more tests. Scans followed. Full examinations, one after the other. Doctors came in and out with serious faces, reviewing results, checking again, whispering softly to George. Emily never left her father's side. She held his hand the entire time, afraid to hope. When the final results came in, George studied them for a long moment. Then he read them again. Nothing changed. Emily leaned closer, confusion clouding her face. "Dad," she whispered. "This says you're fine." George cleared his throat. "Emily, could you help me make some coffee in the kitchen?" She hesitated, then nodded. The moment the door closed, Richard straightened, his shoulders lifted, his breathing changed. George watched closely. Richard looked around the room, his voice steady. Now I know better, he said calmly. He paused. I was never sick. George exhaled slowly. I suspected. I needed to see clearly, Richard continued. And I did. Before Emily could return, footsteps sounded in the hallway. She entered with the coffee tray and froze. The cup slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. Shock crossed her face. Then relief. Then tears. You're okay, she whispered, rushing forward. They stayed together for days after that. Talking. Traveling. Laughing. For the first time in years, Richard walked freely again. Strong. Steady. Present. Before returning home, Richard pulled Emily aside. Say nothing, he told her gently. Not yet. When Richard finally returned, he was transformed. Fresh haircut. Sharp suit. Clear eyes. That evening, his doctor arrived. His lawyer followed. Emily called everyone downstairs. Michael, Daniel, and me. The moment Richard stepped into the room, the air changed. Michael's face drained of color. Daniel's confidence collapsed into disbelief. I felt my breath leave my body. This was not the man we had managed. This was not the man we had spoken over. This was Richard, standing tall. He looked at each of us slowly. I know everything, he said. Silence swallowed the room. He spoke calmly. About the companies. The properties. The decisions made without him. The greed. The abandonment. Then he opened the folder. I have updated my will, he said. All names have been removed. Gasps followed, except one. Emily froze. You stayed, Richard said softly. When everyone else left. Then he turned to us. You did not fail because I was sick, he said. You failed because you thought I was finished. Something inside me broke. I stepped forward, tears spilling freely. Richard. Please. I was tired. I was scared. I still love you. He looked at me for a long moment. I begged for love, he said quietly. When I needed it most. His voice did not rise. That was what hurt. Now, he continued. I need peace. I reached for him. He stepped back. It was too late. And in that moment, I finally understood the truth. The illness had never been the story. We were. Moral lesson: when power fades, true character speaks. Illness and weakness do not destroy families. Greed, impatience, and forgotten loyalty do. If this story touched you, don't stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Shishi Fairy Tales. More mysteries, more lessons, and more truth are waiting for you.